The black waitress told the Mafia boss, "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." What? The night the worlds of power and quiet dignity collided began in a crowded Italian restaurant on the north side of the city, a place where polished brass lights glowed above dark oak tables, and every server learned on the first day that silence was safety. The dinner rush was loud, with the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversations blending into a familiar rhythm. Yet everything shifted the moment he walked in. The door opened, and the energy in the room dropped as if sucked into a void. Dominic Marino, the man whispered about in every back alley and courtroom, stepped inside with the calm authority of someone who carried entire empires in his shadow. His tailored charcoal coat fell perfectly against his strong frame, and his sharp gaze swept over the room with the precision of a man who noticed everything and forgot nothing. The staff tensed. Conversations softened. Even the music seemed to hesitate. But at table 9, a young black waitress named Liana tried her best to steady her breath. She carried a tray of steaming plates, her palms damp, her steps practiced and quiet. She had worked double shifts for 3 weeks straight to cover her mother's medication, and exhaustion clung to her like a heavy coat. Still, she kept her posture straight, her eyes gentle, her voice soft. She always believed that dignity cost nothing but meant everything. Liana moved toward Dominic's table, unaware that her life was about to twist in a way she could never have imagined. As she approached, the light from a hanging lamp caught the thin fabric of her sleeve, revealing a faint tattoo on her wrist, a small circular symbol with 3 curved lines. A design she had seen since childhood, when her mother would trace it on her skin during bedtime stories. Dominic noticed it instantly. His eyes narrowed, his posture straightened, and his hand, the one resting on the linen tablecloth, curled slowly into a fist. His men stopped talking. The tension rolled through the air like a cold wind. When Liana leaned forward to place the plates on the table, Dominic's voice cut through the moment with a quiet steel that froze her mid-motion. "Where did you get that mark?" Liana blinked, confused at first, then followed his gaze to her wrist. Her heartbeat stumbled. She felt every pair of eyes around the table settle on her, as if waiting for a wrong answer. She swallowed, her voice trembling but honest, because honesty was the only thing she had ever owned. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The entire table went silent. Dominic's jaw slackened for a brief second, an expression no one in the room had ever witnessed on him. And in that breath of stunned stillness, Liana felt something she could not name shift in the air, as if the past had reached out a hand and placed it gently on her shoulder, refusing to stay buried any longer. Liana did not move at first. The words she had spoken in the previous moment still hung in the air like a dropped glass that had not yet shattered. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." Dominic Marino kept staring at the faint symbol on her wrist, the same curved lines he had hidden beneath his own cuff. His posture was rigid, but something in his expression had cracked, revealing a brief flicker of confusion, maybe even recognition. The other diners watched in terrified silence, but Dominic lifted one hand slightly, a gesture that told his men to stay seated. Liana drew a slow breath, trying to steady the pounding in her chest. She had never wanted to catch the attention of a man like this, never wanted to stand beneath the scrutiny of eyes that seemed to weigh truth itself. She lowered the tray onto a nearby service cart and pressed her hands together to keep them from shaking. "I am sorry, sir. I did not mean anything disrespectful. I was only answering your question." For a long moment, Dominic did not respond. His silence was unnerving, like a storm forming behind still air. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than anyone expected. "What is your name?" Liana felt her breath catch. "Liana Carter, sir." "And this mark?" His gaze lowered again to her wrist. "How long have you had it?" "Since I was a child, sir. My mother drew it on my skin when I was young, and then when I was older, she took me to a small studio in our neighborhood and had it made permanent. She always said it meant protection." That word made Dominic's jaw tighten, but not in anger, more like memory. Protection. His voice trailed off as if he were speaking to himself rather than to her. "Tell me about your mother." The request was unexpected. Liana hesitated, unsure how much to say, unsure how her truth could matter to a man whose shadow frightened half the city. She looked down at her hands, remembering the worn lines on her mother's palms, the gentle strength in her voice. "My mother's name is Mara. She raised me alone." She worked long hours at a nursing home and took on extra cleaning jobs to keep us fed. She never talked about her past, and when I asked about the tattoo, she said it belonged to a different life. A life she left for good. Dominic's eyes sharpened at that. A different life. Yes, sir. My mother said some people would recognize the symbol, but she always told me not to be afraid of it. She said it only meant something to people who understood it. Liana tried to smile, but it faltered. I never understood what she meant. Dominic leaned back slightly in his chair, but his gaze stayed locked on her, as if searching her face for a piece of his past. Liana felt the silence stretch again. She did not know if she had said something wrong, but she could not stop now. She wanted to protect her mother's dignity. She always does that, she continued softly. She always warns me about strangers who ask too much or look too long. She has been sick lately, and I work all these shifts so I can take care of her, but she still tells me the same thing. Never show that tattoo unless you trust someone. Dominic inhaled slowly. And yet you showed it now. Liana lowered her gaze. The sleeve slipped while I was serving your table. I did not mean to. I am sorry if it caused offense. Dominic did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his left hand and pulled his cuff back, revealing a deep black symbol on his wrist. Not faint like hers, but bold, precise, unmistakable. The same circular shape. The same 3 curved lines. Liana gasped softly, unable to hide the shock blooming across her face. She had seen her mother trace that exact shape on her own skin in the dim light of their apartment, murmuring. Words Liana never fully heard. Dominic's voice lowered, heavy with something she could not yet name. Your mother told you this symbol means protection. Mine told me the same thing. Liana's breath stilled. Sir, do you know her? Dominic looked up at her, and something in his eyes shifted again, something almost human beneath the steel. I do not know yet, but I intend to find out. And for the first time since she began working at that restaurant, Liana felt the weight of her quiet world tilt on its axis, pulled into a past she never knew belonged to her. The restaurant did not return to its usual rhythm after Dominic revealed the bold black symbol on his wrist. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Liana stood frozen beside the table, her heart thudding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She had never imagined that a simple shift, a simple moment beneath a warm lamp, could unravel the quiet life she had been clinging to for so long. Dominic watched her with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. His men sat still, their eyes moving between him and the young waitress, unsure whether this moment called for caution or respect. Most of the diners pretended not to stare, but they could not hide their curiosity. It was rare to see Dominic Marino unsettled by anything. He finally spoke, his voice quieter, steadier, touched with something she could not yet name. Sit down for a moment, Liana. She hesitated. Sir, I am working. Please, sit. It was not a command laced with the usual edge. It was something almost gentle, yet still weighted by authority. Liana pulled a chair from a nearby table and lowered herself onto it, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt small beneath the warm glow of the chandelier, yet strangely seen in a way she had not been seen in years. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze studying her as if she were the missing piece in a story he had spent too long trying to forget. Tell me more about the studio where you got the tattoo. Liana shook her head slowly. My mother never gave me the address. It was a small place in our neighborhood. She told me to keep my head down and follow her inside. I remember the smell of incense and old wood. The artist was an older woman who spoke softly. She said the symbol already belonged to me. Dominic's eyebrows pulled together. Did your mother ever mention a name? A group? A place from her past? She shook her head again. No, sir. She said the less I knew, the safer I would be. Dominic exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that barely moved his shoulders. The silence that followed was thick. Liana could feel tension pulling at the edges of the room, as if the truth was pacing back and forth, waiting to be let out. When Dominic finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she did not expect. There was a time when I was very young, before anyone knew my name or the power I would inherit. My family was hunted, forced into hiding. There were only a few people my mother trusted. One of them had this mark, the same symbol, the same lines, the same shape. Liana stared at him, her eyes wide, the truth circling her like a slow-forming storm. Sir, what did it mean to them? Dominic looked down at the symbol on his wrist, running a thumb over it. Protection. Loyalty. A promise kept in the years when survival was not guaranteed. It was given only to the ones who saved us. The ones who put themselves in danger to keep us alive. Liana's hands tightened in her lap. Sir, are you saying my mother helped your family? I do not know yet, but it is possible. He paused, then added, it is more possible than you realize. Liana felt her breath falter. She had grown up watching her mother move through life with caution, always checking windows, always locking the door twice, always keeping their world small. She had never understood it. She had always thought her mother was simply afraid of the dark parts of the city. But what if the fear came from something far older, far deeper? As the truth pressed closer, Dominic's expression softened in a way she had never seen. You said your mother is sick. Yes, sir. Bad days are becoming more frequent. She forgets things. She shakes sometimes. It scares me. Dominic nodded, thoughtful. I want to meet her. Liana's breath caught. Sir, I do not know if that is a good idea. My mother is private. She would be terrified if you showed up at our door. He met her gaze, steady and unwavering. Then we will let her choose. But this symbol ties our histories together, and I cannot ignore that. Not now. Not again. The words again lingered in the air. Liana felt a chill. Dominic leaned back, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. If your mother is who I think she might be, then you have been living in the shadow of a truth far bigger than you realize. And I intend to bring that truth into the light. For both of us. The room grew silent again, and Liana felt the world shift beneath her feet, carrying her toward a past she had never asked to inherit, and a future she could no longer turn away from. The restaurant lights glowed softly against the polished oak tables, but the warmth in the room no longer reached Liana. Her pulse thudded in her ears, loud enough that she could not hear the clinking dishes or the hum of conversation around her. Dominic's words from the previous moment circled in her mind, each one landing with the weight of something she was not prepared to carry. If your mother is who I think she might be. That sentence had the power to rewrite her entire life. She sat across from him, hands still clasped tightly in her lap, trying to process the meaning hidden in his steady gaze. Dominic did not look like a man searching for excuses or coincidences. He looked like someone who recognized a truth before anyone else dared to speak it aloud. He leaned back slightly, studying her face with quiet resolve, while the shadows around him made his expression seem even sharper. Liana, he said, his voice low, I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever seen anyone else with this mark? Anyone besides your mother? Liana shook her head slowly. No, sir. I never thought it meant anything. I never saw it on anyone else until tonight. She inhaled nervously. My mother always covered hers. She said it would bring trouble if people saw it. Dominic lifted his chin slightly, as if the words stirred an old memory he had kept buried. Trouble. Yes, that is one way to describe what it meant in the past. Liana felt a chill ripple under her skin. Sir, what does it mean to you? Dominic did not answer right away. His gaze drifted to the window, where reflections from the street cast faint movements across the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet intensity. When I was young, my family was hunted. We had enemies far more powerful than we understood at the time. We were forced into hiding. My mother trusted no one. No one except a small group of people who carried this symbol. People willing to risk everything to protect us. Liana's breath caught. Her mother had always clung to fear like a second skin, never letting her out after dark, never allowing visitors, always double-checking doors and windows. What if all of it came from a history Liana had never been told? Dominic's eyes returned to her, sharper now. You said your mother took you to a studio. Did she ever tell you why she wanted you to have the symbol as well? Liana looked down at her wrist, the faint lines barely visible beneath the soft lamplight. She shook her head. No, sir. She only said she wanted me to have what she had. She said it was part of us. Dominic nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. That is exactly what a protector would say. Liana blinked, confused. A protector? Yes. My family's protectors were not soldiers. They were not fighters. They were ordinary people who had lost everything because of the chaos in our world and chose to help anyway. They formed a network that shielded us when no one else would. People with nothing to gain. People with everything to lose. Liana pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady the rising ache. Sir, are you saying my mother was part of that network? Dominic leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice tightening. Liana, I remember one of them. A woman named Mara. Liana's heart stopped. Her mother's name. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Dominic continued softly. She lived in hiding. She moved often. She never stayed in one place too long. She had the symbol on her wrist. She was gentle but cautious. Brave but quiet. She saved my family more than once. Liana felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. That sounded exactly like her mother. The carefulness. The silence. The constant fear she tried to hide behind a tired smile. Dominic's voice softened further, his tone almost reverent. If your mother is the same Mara I remember, then you are not just a waitress with an unusual mark. You are the daughter of a woman who changed the course of my family's history. Liana felt her entire chest tighten. The weight of her mother's sacrifices pressed down on her like a sudden storm. She had always known Mara carried secrets, but she had never imagined they were tied to a past that had shaped the life of one of the most powerful men in the city. Before she could speak, a sharp voice cut through the moment. Liana, what do you think you are doing? Her manager, a man with a perpetually sour expression, stormed toward them. His irritation echoed across the restaurant. You are sitting with customers. Again. How many times do I have to remind you that you are here to serve, not to socialize? Liana flinched, instinctively rising from her chair, but Dominic lifted one hand. The gesture was small, yet the entire room went still. The manager's voice faltered mid-sentence. Dominic did not raise his tone. He did not glare. He only said, "She is speaking with me. Sit down, Liana." And as the manager backed away silently, pale as snow, Liana realized just how deeply her life was changing in this single night, and how impossible it would be to return to the quiet path she once knew. The manager's footsteps faded into the background, but the sting of his words clung to Liana's skin like cold air after a storm. She lowered herself back into the chair at Dominic's request, though her hands trembled with a mixture of embarrassment and fear. Being scolded in front of customers was nothing new. It had happened before, sometimes quietly, sometimes sharply, but never in front of a man whose presence could silence an entire room with a single measured breath. Liana kept her eyes down, afraid to meet Dominic's gaze, afraid of what he might think now that her vulnerability had been exposed so publicly. She pressed her palms together, forcing herself to breathe deeply. She had survived far worse moments than this. Nights when she had to count loose change to buy medication for her mother. Days when exhaustion bent her shoulders, until they felt as if they would break. Yet something about this moment felt heavier. It felt like she was standing at the edge of a truth that could change everything she knew. Dominic watched her closely, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. He should not have spoken to you like that. Liana swallowed hard. Sir, it is all right. It is just part of the job. Dominic shook his head very slowly. No, it is not. She forced a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. With respect, sir, people like him do not change. And managers like him see girls like me as replaceable. It is fine. I am used to it. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes steady. You should never be used to disrespect. Liana felt her throat tighten, but she pushed the emotion away. She could not break down here. Not in front of him. Not in front of an entire restaurant that had gone silent enough for her to hear her own breathing. She redirected the conversation gently. Sir, earlier you said my mother might have helped your family. That is a very serious possibility, but I do not understand any of it. My mother is nobody important. She worked 3 jobs. She went to church on Sundays. She kept to herself. Dominic studied her face, searching. What you describe is exactly the kind of life a protector would live. Quiet. Ordinary on the surface. Always cautious. Always watching. Liana shook her head, confused. But why would she never tell me? Why hide everything? Dominic hesitated, then asked softly, how old were you when she became sick? Liana looked down at her hands. The first signs began about 5 years ago. She would forget small things. Dates. Addresses. Then she began having tremors. Doctors said it might be a neurological condition. Dominic knit his brows. So she became careful before the illness. Yes, sir. Ever since I was young. She hid receipts. She checked doors. She always said danger follows people who know too much. Dominic exhaled, almost sadly. Then she was already running long before the sickness. Liana's heartbeat quickened. Running from what? Or from who? Dominic did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened, as if wrestling with a truth he was not fully ready to speak aloud. Instead, he said, "Your mother protected you. And it seems she did it alone. That kind of isolation does not come from nowhere." Liana felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. She blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. "Sir, if my mother saved your family, why did you never look for her?" Dominic held her gaze. His voice dropped into a quiet confession. "Because I was very young then. And later, when I finally had power, I was told she had died." Liana's breath escaped in a small, broken whisper. "Died. That was what I was told," he repeated. "But I never saw proof. And no one who knew her could explain what happened to her. She simply disappeared." Liana brought a hand to her mouth. For a moment, the restaurant blurred around her. The idea that her own mother had a past as dangerous as Dominic's felt like stepping into cold water. "Sir, if she disappeared, then how can you be sure it was her?" "Because," Dominic said, "that mark was only given to a very small number of people. And because the woman named Mara was the only one brave enough to smuggle my family out of danger when the city turned against us." Liana shook her head, overwhelmed. "I cannot believe my mother would be involved in anything like that. She worked herself to exhaustion for years, just so I could have a normal life." Dominic's voice softened, warm in a way she had not expected. "Liana, sometimes the people who appear the most ordinary carry the greatest stories. And sometimes the quietest lives are the ones built on sacrifice." His words wrapped around her like a blanket, but also like a warning. Before she could respond, her manager returned, his face flushed with irritation. "Liana, you are done at that table. Move along before you embarrass this place more than you already have." Dominic did not even look at him when he spoke. "She will not be moving anywhere." The manager froze in place. "Sir, she is an employee. She is not allowed to sit." Dominic turned his head very slightly, his gaze cold enough to drop the temperature of the room. "Then perhaps you should consider treating your employees with respect, or finding a new line of work entirely." The manager's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. He backed away slowly, his shoes scraping against the polished floor. And as he retreated, Liana felt her composure begin to crumble. Her world was shifting too fast, too violently, too completely. She looked at Dominic, her voice barely a whisper. "Sir, what is happening to my life?" Dominic held her gaze. The light above them reflected in his dark eyes, revealing something steady, something certain. "The truth, Liana. The truth is finally catching up to us both." The restaurant had settled into a strange stillness, the kind that made every breath feel louder than it should have been. Liana sat rigidly in her chair, trying to understand how her ordinary shift had turned into a confrontation with truths she never imagined. Dominic remained seated across from her, his posture calm, but his gaze sharpened with a focus that pierced through the noise she felt inside her chest. Everything around them seemed to fade, as if the world had chosen to shrink to the small space between their eyes. Dominic spoke first, his tone lower than before, steady but heavy with something complicated. "Liana, I need you to listen closely. I have spent years trying to uncover the truth about what happened in my childhood. And after everything you have told me tonight, I am no longer convinced your presence here is a coincidence." She inhaled shakily, her fingers twisting together. "Sir, I do not understand how any of this connects to me. I am just trying to get through the night." Dominic shook his head slowly, almost painfully. "You are not just anyone. If your mother is Mara, then you are connected to a part of my past that no one else has ever been able to explain." Liana blinked, her heart thudding against her ribs. She wanted to deny it, to step away from the weight of his words, but the look on his face told her he was not speaking from suspicion. He was speaking from memory. She hesitated before asking, barely above a whisper, "Sir, how much do you remember about her?" Dominic took in a breath as if pulling old shadows from the depths of his mind. "More than I wish I did. Mara was not just another protector. She was the bravest among them. She saved my life once, in a dark alley behind a warehouse that was owned by people who wanted my family erased." Liana felt her stomach tighten. "Sir, my mother never mentioned any of this. She barely talked about her own life. She said there were reasons she chose silence." Dominic nodded, as if her words confirmed something he already suspected. Protectors lived in silence for survival. The more they spoke, the more danger they invited. And the ones with the most to hide chose to speak the least. He leaned forward slightly, his voice softening. Liana, when you walked into my restaurant the first time and I saw you from a distance, I thought you looked familiar. Not in the way people recognize a face. More like a memory of a peaceful moment in chaos. Her breath stilled. Sir, I do not understand. Dominic continued, his eyes distant. There was a night, many years ago, when I was hiding in a small safe house. I was just a boy, scared and exhausted. And I remember a warm voice humming a soft tune while cooking. I remember feeling safe for the first time in my life. That voice was your mother's. Liana's hand rose to her mouth, not to silence herself, but because she felt something inside her collapse. She had heard her mother hum that same melody every night while cooking. It was the sound of her childhood. Dominic's voice grew gentler. When I heard you hum that exact melody on your first week here, I knew it was not something to ignore. Liana stared at him, stunned. She had always hummed softly while working. It calmed her. She had never known the tune meant anything to him. For a moment, she could not speak. She felt torn between disbelief and a rising sense of recognition she had felt her whole life, but never understood. Dominic saw the conflict in her eyes. He lowered his voice even more. Liana, there is something else. Something I did not want to mention until I was certain. Liana forced herself to look at him. What is it? Dominic hesitated. When Mara disappeared, there were rumors. Rumors that she left because she was protecting someone far more vulnerable than herself. Liana's heart pounded in her ears. Sir, what are you saying? He exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of unspoken grief. I am saying that your mother may have risked everything not just for my family, but for you, for your life. Liana felt the room tilt. She clutched the edge of the table, fighting the sudden wave of dizziness. Dominic steadied her with a quiet, reassuring voice. Liana, you have spent your whole life believing your mother was running from nothing, but she was running from enemies who would have destroyed her, and she did it all while carrying you in her arms. Liana closed her eyes, tears finally spilling despite her efforts to hold them back. She had grown up thinking her mother was simply afraid of the world, but now she realized her mother had been protecting her from something much darker, something she could not see. And the truth, spoken so gently by a man who once lived in the shadows her mother shielded him from, crashed over her like a wave she had no choice but to face. Dominic watched her with a softened gaze, and for the first time since the night began, he seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. Liana, he said quietly, you were never meant to carry this truth alone. No one should. She lifted her gaze, her voice barely a breath. Sir, what do we do now? Dominic looked at her with certainty rising in his eyes. Now, Liana, we uncover the truth together. The restaurant's low lights flickered against the polished floor as if the building itself sensed the shift inside Liana. Her breath came unsteady, her mind swirling with the truth Dominic had revealed. Her mother had carried secrets heavier than Liana ever guessed, secrets that connected her to a world built on danger and loyalty and sacrifice. She felt as though she had been walking through her life without knowing the ground beneath her feet, and now the earth had cracked open. Dominic watched her carefully, the controlled calm on his face revealing a deeper concern beneath. He did not rush her. He did not push. He simply waited, letting her steady herself. But the moment she lifted her eyes to his, the fragile calm she held inside her chest shattered. Sir, she whispered, her voice barely audible. If my mother risked everything for your family, why did she never tell me? Dominic leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle. Liana, secrets like hers are not shared. They are carried, passed down only when the danger has passed. And in her case, the danger never did. Liana looked away, her nails digging softly into her palms. She had so many memories of her mother standing in the kitchen late at night, staring out the window as if waiting for shadows to move. She remembered the way her mother always paused before unlocking the door, even in broad daylight. She remembered the fear she never explained. Sir, Liana said, her voice trembling, do you think those people are still out there? The ones who hunted your family? Dominic did not answer at once. The silence told her more than his words ever could. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm. I think some enemies never truly disappear. But they are weaker now. And if your mother is the woman who saved us, then I owe her a debt I have never been able to repay. Liana blinked hard, fighting the pull of tears she did not want to shed in front of an entire dining room. She felt exposed, fragile, yet strangely anchored by Dominic's presence. Sir, I cannot imagine my mother in that world. She never raised her voice. She barely left the house unless she had to work. Dominic's gaze softened. Quiet strength is still strength, Liana. And bravery does not always look like a battle. Sometimes it looks like a woman who walks 5 blocks to her job, even when she is exhausted. Sometimes it looks like a mother who hides her fear so her child can grow up without carrying the weight of her past. The words settled over Liana like warm fabric, comforting and painful at the same time. But just as she felt herself beginning to breathe again, a sharp voice cut through the quiet. Girl, bring the check. I have been waiting long enough. A man from another table waved dismissively. His voice carried the irritation of someone who felt entitled to be served instantly. Liana flinched, instinct guiding her to rise, but Dominic lifted his hand slightly. Stay, he said. Liana hesitated. But sir, he is angry. Dominic only shook his head. That is not your burden tonight. Another server quickly stepped in, recognizing Dominic's tone and knowing better than to challenge it. But the interruption had cracked something inside Liana, a reminder of how easily the world dismissed her, how quickly people assumed she was invisible, replaceable, undeserving of respect. She lowered her gaze, her voice faint. Sir, I have spent my whole life trying to stay out of trouble, trying to take care of my mother, trying to work hard and keep my head down. Now everything feels like it is falling apart. Dominic leaned closer, his voice steady and grounding. Liana, listen to me. Nothing is falling apart. Something hidden is being revealed. That is different. She shook her head softly. It feels the same. His voice lowered even further, gentle but firm. You have spent years carrying your mother's fears without understanding their origin. That is a heavy burden. But you are stronger than you know. Liana felt her eyes burn again. Sir, I am scared. Dominic's gaze held hers. Fear is natural. But you are not alone in this. Not anymore. She swallowed hard. Her heart thudded painfully. Sir, what if the truth is worse than we think? Then we face it, Dominic said. Together. The word echoed inside her chest like a quiet promise. And that was the moment Liana realized the night was no longer only about the past. It was about the moment when the weight she had carried alone for her entire life became something she no longer had to face without help. The 2 men in the far corner did not rise, did not speak loudly, did not reach for anything that might draw attention. And somehow that made everything worse. Liana felt their glances like cold fingertips down her spine, subtle, yet unmistakably intentional. She could not hear their words, but she could see their tension, the way their shoulders leaned in, the way they stared at Dominic and then at her wrist, as if recognizing a truth neither of them should have seen. Dominic did not break eye contact with the men, but his voice reached Liana with a calmness that steadied her heartbeat. Listen to me carefully. Do not look at them again. Do not react. Just focus on my voice. Liana swallowed hard and nodded, keeping her gaze low even though every instinct screamed for her to look at the danger closing in. Sir, she whispered, are they here for you or for me? Dominic answered without hesitation. For both of us, because our pasts are tied together, and you have something they have been hunting for a very long time. Liana felt a chill pulse through her body. The weight of her mother's silence suddenly made perfect sense. This was why Mara Carter never spoke of her past, why she lived as a shadow in broad daylight, why the tattoo had always been hidden as if it held a curse. Sir, Liana whispered, her voice trembling, what do they want? Dominic leaned closer, lowering his voice until the world felt as though it had shrunk to only the 2 of them. They want the protectors erased. All of them. Anyone who ever shielded my family. Anyone with the symbol. They believe your mother had information that could destroy what they built. And they believe she passed it down. Liana felt a cold surge of fear so deep it made her grip the table edge. Sir, I do not know anything. They will not believe that, Dominic said firmly. They never do. His gaze sharpened as one of the men stood and walked toward the bar, pretending to examine the wine list. The other man remained seated, but his eyes followed the waitress clearing the nearby tables. Dominic read the pattern immediately. They are waiting for you to move. They want to isolate you. Liana pressed her trembling hands together. Sir, we need to leave. Yes, Dominic said, his voice steady. But not in panic. Not in haste. If we move too suddenly, they will follow. And I will not risk letting them trail you home. Liana's breath caught. Home. Her mother. Sir, if they follow me, my mother could be in danger. Dominic nodded very slightly. That is why they will not get close to you. Not tonight. Not ever again. Liana felt a surge of gratitude she did not have words for, but it was swallowed quickly by a new fear as the man at the bar flicked his gaze directly at her wrist. He whispered something to the bartender, who pretended not to listen. But Liana could see the tension ripple beneath the surface. Dominic exhaled, calm but sharp. They know. Allowing himself one more glance at the men, he turned back to Liana with a softer expression. I need you to trust me. I do, she whispered, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. Dominic nodded. Good, because the next few minutes will determine what happens next. Liana drew a shaky breath. Sir, how can you stay so calm? Dominic looked at her with a steadiness that almost felt like a shield. Because I have seen far worse nights than this. And because I promised myself that. If your mother ever returned to this world, I would protect her with my life. You are her daughter. That promise extends to you. Liana blinked hard, tears blurring her vision. She had spent years believing no one else in the world cared about the weight her mother carried. To learn that her mother had not faced the darkness alone, that someone powerful still remembered her sacrifices, made her chest ache with something deep and bewildering. Dominic leaned in, his voice low and final. When I tell you to stand, you stand. When I tell you to walk, you walk. You do not look back. You stay close, no matter what happens. Liana nodded, her breath unsteady but determined. Yes, sir. Dominic's eyes held hers for one steady second. Then he said quietly, they are about to make their move. Liana straightened in her chair, every nerve awake, every fear pounding inside her, yet somehow steadied by the presence of the man sitting across from her. And in that fragile, breathless moment, she realized something she had not understood until now. The danger was real. The past was reaching for her. And this was the moment everything in her life pivoted toward the truth she could no longer avoid. The man at the bar shifted his weight slightly, just enough for Dominic to know the moment was seconds away from breaking. Liana felt the tension rise around them like a tide climbing higher with each breath. Her pulse thudded beneath her skin, loud enough that she wondered if the whole room could hear it. Dominic kept his gaze steady, his calm presence forming a barrier she clung to. When I tell you, we move, he murmured. Liana nodded, her throat tight. She could feel eyes on her. The faint hum of the restaurant had disappeared. Even the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen seemed distant. The world had narrowed to the space between Dominic and the danger quietly circling them. Suddenly, one of the men rose from his seat. He did not make a scene. He did not shout. He simply stood and adjusted his jacket, his eyes fixed on Liana with cool calculation. Dominic stood at the exact same moment. His movement was controlled, unhurried, yet filled with enough authority to stop half the room mid-breath. Liana, stand, he said. She rose at once, legs trembling. Stay? Behind me. She stepped closer to him, the warmth of his presence steadying the cold fear building inside her. The second man approached from another angle, pretending to examine a framed photograph on the wall. Dominic noticed. Walk, he told her softly. She followed him as he moved toward the main exit, but the room had changed. Silence had settled into the walls, thick and expectant. The man near the bar stepped forward. Excuse me, he said, his voice polite but wrong in a way that made Liana's skin prickle. You forgot something. Dominic stopped, but only for a heartbeat. He turned just enough to shield Liana completely. And what is that? Dominic asked, his tone calm, but edged with warning. The man's gaze slid to Liana's wrist. That mark. Dominic's jaw tightened. That is none of your business. The man smiled, the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. Everything about her is our business. Liana's breath hitched, fear rising so sharply she pressed a hand against her stomach to keep it from showing. Dominic stepped forward, his presence filling the space between her and the threat like a wall of steel. You will step back, Dominic said. Now. But the man did not move. Instead, he nodded to his partner, who had drifted closer. We know who she is, the man said. We know whose child she is. Liana froze. Dominic's voice dropped lower than she had ever heard it. Careful. The man's smile widened. Her mother has what we want. And now that she is ill, the daughter must have it. That was when Dominic moved, not with violence, not with a raised voice, but with a calm finality that made the air shift. You will not go near her, he said. She is under my protection. The man laughed softly. Since when does Dominic Marino protect waitresses? The entire room held its breath. Dominic's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Since her mother saved my family. Since she carried the mark of the protectors. Since before either of you were relevant. A quiet gasp rippled through the restaurant. The man's eyes narrowed. Move aside. Dominic shook his head once. No. Liana felt her knees weaken. No one had ever spoken for her with such certainty. No one had ever stepped between her and danger. Dominic turned his head slightly, his voice softer. When he addressed her, Liana, stay behind me and do not let go of my sleeve. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they gripped the fabric of his coat. His arm remained steady. She was close enough to sense the calm power radiating from him. Then Dominic turned back to the men, his voice hardening. You made a mistake coming here. This place is mine. Everyone in this room is under my authority, and she is under my protection. The two men exchanged a look, one that admitted their plan was failing. But they did not step back. The man nearest them spoke again, softer now, more threatening. You cannot hide her forever. Dominic smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I do not need forever. I only need tonight. And tonight you will leave. Now. Something in his tone, something ancient and merciless, made both men hesitate. Then slowly, reluctantly, they stepped backward. Dominic watched every movement, his gaze unblinking. The men turned toward the door as if leaving on their own terms, but everyone in the room knew they had been dismissed. Only when the bell above the doorway chimed softly, signaling their exit, did Liana exhale the breath she had been holding. Her legs trembled, but she stayed standing, still gripping Dominic's sleeve. He looked down at her, his voice softer. Liana, are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to form words. Dominic nodded once. Good. Then we are leaving. Those men will not stop with words. Not tonight. Not ever again. And with the entire restaurant silent and watching, Dominic placed a steady hand at her back and guided her toward the door, the air shifting as if even the walls understood that something irreversible had just begun. The night air outside the restaurant felt colder than it should have been, sharp enough to raise goosebumps along Liana's arms as she stepped out with Dominic guiding her forward. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, stretching out like dark fingers reaching across the quiet sidewalks. Liana stayed close to Dominic, her hand gripping the edge of his sleeve just as he had instructed, afraid that if she let go even for a moment, the thin thread holding her together might snap. Dominic scanned the street with deliberate care, his posture rigid, alert, every movement measured. His calmness did not hide the intensity in his eyes. It only made it clearer. Stay close, he murmured. They will not follow us immediately. They know better than to cause a scene in public. But they will not be far. Liana nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She had never felt the city like this before. Not as a familiar place she walked through on her way to work. Not as the home she had known since childhood. Tonight the city felt like a maze of shadows, any one of which could hold danger. Dominic's car was parked just a short distance away, sleek and dark beneath a street lamp. When they reached it, he opened the passenger door for her. Get inside. Liana slipped into the seat, her hands trembling as she pulled the seatbelt across her chest. Dominic moved to the driver's side, but before he entered, he paused to look up and down the street once more. Only when he was certain it was safe did he join her inside the car. The doors shut with a heavy thud, sealing them off from the night. Liana felt a momentary sense of safety, but her mind spun with fear. Sir, she whispered, her voice fragile, what happens now? Dominic started the engine, the quiet hum filling the tense silence. Now, he said, we make sure your mother is safe. The words hit her harder than she expected. She turned to him quickly, panic rising in her chest. Sir, what if those men go to our apartment? What if they hurt her? Dominic placed a firm hand on the steering wheel. They will not reach her before we do. I will not allow it. Liana drew a shaky breath, trying to trust him, but the fear for her mother's safety made her chest ache. Dominic continued driving through the quiet streets, his voice steady. Liana, your mother risked her life to protect mine. It is time I repaid that debt. Liana looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. Sir, my mother never told me any of this. She never said she helped anyone. Dominic nodded, eyes forward. She hid the truth because she believed it was the only way to keep you safe. And she was right. Until tonight. Liana stared through the windshield, the passing streetlights blurring slightly through her tears. She had spent years watching her mother battle fear alone, watching her shrink from strangers, watching her grow smaller beneath the weight of her hidden past. And now the truth of that past was chasing them through the city, no longer willing to stay buried. Dominic slowed the car as they approached a quiet intersection, his expression tightening. Tell me something, Liana. Before tonight, did your mother ever mention anyone from her past? Anyone she feared? Anyone she missed? Liana swallowed hard. She mentioned a woman, once. Only once. She called her Lucia. Dominic's hands tightened around the wheel. Lucia? Liana nodded weakly. She said Lucia was the bravest person she ever knew. She said Lucia taught her to trust her instincts. Dominic exhaled, a deep, almost painful sound. Lucia was my mother. Liana felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. Sir, that means my mother and your mother were close. Very close. Dominic's voice softened. They trusted each other when trust was dangerous. They kept each other alive. And if they stayed together long enough for you to have memories of your mother talking about Lucia, then something separated them. Something serious. Liana looked at him, her voice breaking. Sir, you think someone forced them apart? Dominic's gaze hardened with certainty. I know they did. Protectors did not simply vanish. They were erased. The truth hit Liana like ice. She pressed a shaking hand to her forehead, her breath trembling. Sir, I cannot lose her. I cannot let anything happen to her. Dominic glanced at her, his voice steady and sure. You will not lose her. Not while I am here. Liana stared at him, searching his face. There was no fear in his expression. Only determination. Only resolve. Only a quiet promise that ran deeper than anything she had ever heard. Then Dominic reached the final turn toward her neighborhood. Liana's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Sir, she whispered, please let her be safe. Dominic nodded once. She will be. And if anyone has gone near her, they will answer to me. As the car rolled down her dimly lit street, the world held its breath. And Liana knew they were seconds away from discovering a truth that could either break her life apart or pull the past into the light once and for all. Liana's neighborhood emerged through the windshield as a row of dimly lit apartments hunched beneath the night sky, their windows glowing faintly like tired eyes. Dominic slowed the car to a crawl, his hands steady on the wheel, his attention sharpened into something fierce and protective. Liana sat rigid in the passenger seat, twisting her fingers together, her breath trembling with every second that passed. She watched the familiar street with a rising panic, searching for any sign of disturbance, any shadow that did not belong. Sir, she whispered, her voice barely holding together, I do not see anyone. I do not know if that is a good sign or a bad one. Dominic responded in a low voice, stay calm. We will not make assumptions. Not until we know the truth. The car rolled to a stop in front of her building. Liana's heart hammered as she stared up at the windows of her apartment. One light glowed softly in the living room. Her mother always left that lamp on when Liana worked late nights. The sight made her throat tighten and tears form behind her eyes. Dominic turned off the engine. He reached across the console and placed a steady hand on her trembling one. Listen to me, Liana. No matter what we find inside, you do not face it alone. Not anymore. She took a shaky breath and nodded. Together, she repeated softly. Dominic's expression softened with a quiet sincerity. Yes, together. They stepped out of the car. The night air felt colder here, sharper, as if danger had lingered and left its chill behind. Dominic walked slightly ahead of her, every movement controlled, deliberate, ready. Liana stayed close, her hands tense, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. When they reached the stairwell door, Dominic paused and examined the lock. It is intact, he whispered. That is good. That means no one forced their way in. But Liana still felt fear tightening around her chest. Sir, my mother sometimes forgets to lock it. Dominic's jaw clenched. Then we proceed carefully. He opened the door slowly, and they stepped into the dim stairwell, the fluorescent light above flickering in tired pulses. Each step echoed softly as they climbed toward her apartment door. Liana felt her throat close when she saw the familiar green welcome mat. Nothing seemed out of place, but her fear did not ease. Dominic approached the door quietly, then turned to her. Liana, stand behind me. Stay close. She obeyed, pressing her hand against the fabric of his coat for grounding. Dominic knocked softly. Mara. It is Dominic. Are you awake? For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a faint shuffle came from inside. A soft, tired voice followed. Liana, is that you? Liana gasped. Relief and fear collided inside her chest. Yes, Mama. It is me. Please open the door. The lock clicked. The door eased open, and her mother appeared in the doorway, her eyes cloudy with fatigue, yet widening when she saw the man standing at Liana's side. Dominic. Her voice trembled with disbelief, as if seeing a ghost. Dominic stepped forward slightly. Mara, it has been a long time. Her mother's hand flew to her chest. Her eyes filled with a mix of shock, fear, and something deeper. Something fragile. Liana looked between them. Mama, you know him. Mara swallowed hard. Her voice shook. I know him far more than you ever knew. Her knees weakened, and Dominic gently steadied her arm. You should sit, Mara. You are shaking. Mara let him guide her inside, her breathing uneven. Liana followed, her heart pounding as she shut the door behind them. The apartment was dim but warm, filled with the scent of chamomile tea and old books. But the atmosphere was heavy, thick with memories trying to force their way to the surface. Mara sank onto the couch, her trembling fingers clutching the edge of a cushion. Liana knelt beside her. Mama, what is happening? Her mother looked at her slowly, her expression filled with sorrow. Liana, there is something I never told you. Something I thought I could protect you from by burying it forever. Liana took her mother's hand gently. Mama, I need to know. Mara's voice cracked as she whispered. The men who came for Dominic's family so many years ago. They did not stop. They kept searching. They believed I carried information that could expose everything they built. Liana felt her blood run cold. Mama, what did you do? Mara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. I ran. I ran with you in my arms. I changed our names. I hid us in places no one would think to look. And I prayed every night that they would never find you. Liana's breath broke. Mama. Mara reached up and cupped Liana's cheek. I did everything to keep you safe. Everything. Dominic stepped closer, his voice soft, filled with gratitude. Mara, you saved my life. You saved my family. And now it is my turn to protect yours. Mara looked at him, exhaustion etched into her face. Dominic, they will not stop. They never do. Dominic knelt beside her, his voice steady with unwavering certainty. They will stop now, because they are no longer hunting one woman alone. They are facing me. They are facing us. Mara stared at him, tears pooling in her eyes. Liana felt a powerful ache rise in her chest. Her mother had carried this weight for so long. Alone, silent, afraid. And now the past had finally caught up. But this time, it did not arrive in darkness. It arrived in the form of a man her mother had once trusted with her life. And the moment he said those words, something shifted in the room. The air grew still. The shadows retreated. And for the first time in years, Mara Carter no longer looked afraid. Liana sat close to her mother on the couch, her hands wrapped gently around Mara's trembling fingers, as if the warmth of her touch alone could keep the past from swallowing them whole. Dominic remained standing only a few steps away, not looming, but anchoring the room with a quiet strength that made the air feel less fragile. The small apartment, worn from years of careful living, seemed to hold its breath as the three of them faced the truth that had finally come into the open. Mara wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, I spent so many years looking over my shoulder, praying they would never find you. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I hid long enough, you would grow up free from all of this. Liana tightened her grip. Mama, you protected me. You gave up everything so I could live without fear, even if it meant carrying it all alone. Mara swallowed hard, her voice breaking. I was afraid you would hate me for the secrets. I was afraid you would see me as weak. Liana shook her head quickly, tears gathering in her eyes. Mama, you are the strongest woman I have ever known. Dominic stepped forward then, lowering himself slowly so he was eye level with Mara. You did what few people in this world would have the courage to do. You saved a family when you had nothing left to give. And you saved your daughter by carrying a past meant to destroy you. Mara looked at him with tired, fragile eyes. Dominic, they will come again. They always come again. Dominic's expression did not waver. Then let them come. But this time they face me. Not a mother alone with a child. Not a woman in hiding. They face the son of the family you protected with your life. They face a man you helped keep alive long enough to rebuild everything they tried to tear apart. Liana felt a quiet awe rise within her as she watched the two of them, bound by a shared history she had only just learned existed. She touched her mother's wrist gently, tracing the faint symbol there. "Mama, what does it really mean?" Mara exhaled softly, her voice a trembling whisper. "It means we protect what is good. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. We stand between danger and innocence. It is the mark of someone who chooses courage even when they are afraid." Liana felt the words settle deep in her chest. She looked at her own wrist, the faint lines barely visible in the soft lamplight. "Mama, did you give me this because you wanted me to be part of that?" Mara shook her head gently. "I gave it to you so you could remember that you come from strength. Not from fear. Not from silence. From courage." Dominic watched her with a softened gaze, then reached into the inner pocket of his coat and removed a small metal token engraved with the same curved lines as their tattoos. He placed it carefully on the coffee table. "This belonged to my mother," Dominic said quietly. "She would want you to have it." Mara's breath hitched. She reached out and touched the token with trembling fingers, her lips parting as memories flickered behind her eyes. But Dominic was not finished. He turned to Liana. "And there is something for you as well." Liana blinked, confused, as Dominic removed a folded sheet of paper from his coat. When he opened it, she saw a hand-drawn map, old and worn, marked with a series of symbols. Liana looked up at him in shock. "Sir, what is this?" Dominic met her gaze with steady certainty. "It is the truth your mother protected. The truth my mother died trying to protect. A map to everything the enemies fear." Liana's breath trembled. "Sir, why give it to me?" Dominic's voice softened. "Because you are the last link between the protectors and the ones who carry the mark. And because the strength your mother carried lives in you, even if you do not see it yet." Liana felt her heart swell with a mixture of fear and quiet resolve. She looked at Mara, who nodded through tears. "Liana, this is your choice. But you do not have to walk this path alone." Dominic nodded in agreement. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Liana inhaled a steadying breath. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her past not as a burden, but as an inheritance of courage. She looked between them, her mother's worn eyes and Dominic's unwavering steadiness, and felt something shift inside her like a flame catching fire. Then she placed her hand over the map, her voice soft but firm. "I choose to face it." The room grew still. The past no longer chased them. The future waited. And that night, beneath the dim glow of a single lamp in a small apartment, the world remembered what dignity looks like.